Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Robin Hills on the line. Robin, how are you?
I am doing great, and I'm absolutely delighted to be on your breakfast show, Michael. So thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, thank you very much for taking the time today to be on the show. So why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Yeah, sure. I'm an emotional intelligence coach, trainer, and facilitator. Most of my work is done online. I have a complete range of online courses based around emotional intelligence. And to date, I've got 500,000 people taking my courses across the world in over 200 countries. So that's really the focus of my work. I do quite a bit of work with senior leaders across the globe. I'm looking forward to coming to the US in the next fortnight to deliver a training program. So that's just a little bit about me in a nutshell.
It's amazing work. And I know we talked in the pre-show a little bit about how EI isn't getting enough coverage in all of this AI discussion. And you brought up a really good point about, how we can leverage AI to help with EI. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Before we dive into that aspect, I think it's important that I summarize for your listeners what EI is so that they have a better understanding of it. EI is emotional intelligence. And for me, I've got a very simple definition. It's being smart with your feelings in order to make good quality decisions and build up authentic relationships with the intention of taking action. Now, we all know what AI is. AI is artificial intelligence, and it's becoming increasingly popular, and people are embracing emotional intelligence artificial intelligence, AI, in both positive and negative ways. I think it will revolutionize the workplace, but I'm very optimistic. I don't see us becoming redundant as human beings within the workplace, but we've got to identify what differentiates ourselves from machine technology and the robots. And that's where emotional intelligence sits.
I agree. And it creates opportunities as well because, people say, well, we're going to lose our jobs. And, I think about, history. There's, many, many jobs that no longer exist because we've moved on from that and we've done different things. And there's not a need for those things, but there's a need for other things, from, using an example, rideshare services like Uber and Lyft, those services didn't exist 2 decades ago. Now, people are using it all across the globe. And so it's just one example of, new jobs get created all the time for new things.
Sure. Let me give you a personal example. I started my career at the beginning of the 1980s, so that starts to age me. Now, that was 40 odd years ago, coming up for 50 odd years ago, and the first email hadn't been sent. The internet hadn't been invented, so my job didn't exist, and I couldn't communicate with anybody in the United States without phoning them through an expensive landline or sending them a letter. That was the way that we communicated back then. So my own personal journey has taken me to embrace the new technologies, to build up a set of skills, to create a job for myself, which certainly didn't exist when I started my career. And it's evolved over time, and it's evolving as we speak. So let's embrace technology and do it positively.
I agree. And, my career started in the mid 80s, so not too far behind you. And, I think about, from computer games to ordering things online to just having things delivered to your door and being able to track where they are, and you're getting updates, real-time updates, or instant photos. And I'm not talking about Polaroid pictures. I mean, literally, like, you take it and you can see it right there and then. it takes away from the old practical joke of taking pictures of groups and cutting off their heads in the photo, because they would get it developed and they wouldn't know, you'd be long gone. They'd be upset. And of course, you take a good one too. You don't want to just leave them with a bad one. But gone is that now. Now they look at it and say, okay, that's good. Or they'll say, no, can you take another one? So they kind of feel like directors in TV shows and movies. Cut. No, we got to redo that one. So the technology has expanded, and obviously the more versatile and agile you are, the better you'll be. Plus, I think a lot of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think people sometimes get scared of things that are different or new, but that's all we've seen over the last 4 or 5 decades. It's just innovation after innovation after innovation. So that's the constant, is there's things just being created and new ways of doing things all the time. So it's been, from my vantage point, and of course, I can't speak to what happened before me because I wasn't around, but from my vantage point, the last 50 years have been amazing when it came to innovations and opportunities across the globe, not just in my own backyard.
Oh, well, let's take it back 500 plus years ago, when people were really, really worried about their jobs then, because this printing press, it's going to mean that we're going to lose our job in writing out long manuscripts. So even back in the 13th, 14th century, people were fearful of new technology. Look at the spinning wheels. I live in a part of England where the cotton industry was very rife, and the spinning wheel and some of the weaving machinery technology was invented less than 10 miles away from me. And people were really, really fearful about the fact that that was going to mean that they lost their jobs. And then look at the motor car that came along, and everybody was really fearful about the fact that they weren't going to have to muck out the horses, feed them, and look after them. So jobs have changed, technology has changed, often for the better. And what we've got to do, as we've discussed, we've got to embrace it.
And I think using AI and EI, and as you talked about before, leveraging and figuring out, okay, what's the human aspect of this thing, and utilizing. Have been, neck deep in exploring different ways to utilize AI to simplify things for my work, to learn things, research, provide executive summaries for books. Especially if I'm doing an interview and I, didn't have time to go through the book, I can at least get a summary so I can have some speaking points to talk about. And it's just, streamlined so many things, which has given me the time to be more creative, or maybe some more leisure time, or you name it. There's so many great things to do it. So you look at it and say, okay, it's kind of like being a teenager in a way, and you're dealing with, a new car or a new gadget, and you're like, okay, what's this thing going to do? What can we make it do? And it's this curiosity approach that I have that has, really made, quite frankly, it makes work fun, but it's also making life fun, is just kind of returning back to that curiosity that I had in my youth, bringing that back now that I'm not so youthful at heart, but, body, based on my shoulder this morning, is definitely reminding me that there's a few kilometers on it. So we'll get from there. But it's, I think, again, looking for those ways of, okay, how do we, check, and, from the work you do, and having organizations and individuals really get a good grasp of their EI and what it is and how they operate, I think goes a long way in helping them navigate through life.
Sure. Look, let's start to unpick this emotional intelligence, EI, versus artificial intelligence, AI, because the two work very much in tandem together. And without making too fine a point on it, look at the title of your podcast, Michael. It's the Breakfast Leadership Network. There are two words within that AI just cannot do and will never be able to do. And one of them is leadership, And the other one is network. And don't mean that from a technological computer network perspective. I mean that from a people perspective. As human beings, we're not going to take orders from robots. We're not going to allow the robots to lead us forward. And there are very good reasons, which I'll come back to in a minute. And the other thing that the other thing that robots cannot do is build up emotional connections with people and build up relationships. You and I have talked about our early adulthood. We have learned over the years to adapt to the changing environments. And we've got memories that take us back to the 1980s, the 1990s, the early 200s, what they meant for us and how we've changed through that. So, yeah, both of us perhaps have a few kilometers on the clock, but we've got experience and we have knowledge and we have an emotional knowledge that works for us. We have had a childhood, AI hasn't. And I mean that in terms of the fact that it hasn't been naughty, it hasn't learned lessons of life, it's just been programmed.
I love that analogy because all those experiences, life experiences, and I'm not going to identify them as good or bad or indifferent. They're experiences, and we carry those things with us. Sometimes subconsciously, sometimes they're top of mind. But as we navigate through our day-to-day lives and we experience either setbacks or conversations or you name it, there's always opportunities to utilize our experiences to move forward and do things. And like you said, AI just does what it's told to do. It's a good little employee if you think about it. It's like they just do what we tell them to do and they don't argue back. Now they may give us the wrong answer because we weren't clear in our direction, which is leadership trait, that's human element, where we can kind of decipher it. So they may not interpret this because we understand that Sam, the way we approach this individual and how they best learn is if we present it in this sort of way, focusing on neurodiversity and in other aspects, which AI, is still, a ways away, I think, from being able to do that. Not saying you can't program, but to say, okay, when you give instructions to Sam is neurodivergent and they best learn by presenting it this way. Then you run it through and they present the instructions or work to Sam in a way that they can comprehend it and be successful at completing whatever you're asking them to do. That's a great example of using AI. But there's still a human element of that going, okay, you still have to tell AI how to treat Sam because they're not going to know Sam from anything. They're not going to be able to read personalities, at least at this point.
I don't think they ever will because a lot of personality and behavior is underpinned by emotion. Now, again, emotion can be programmed in to an extent, but real raw emotion can't be programmed in, and that's because AI haven't got what we've got, which is a human brain. And the human brain is continually adapting and evolving. And to go back to your example around Sam and put it under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, now you've just described empathy. And again, this is another fundamental part of what AI cannot and will never be able to do. Yes, it can give empathetic responses, but it can never truly understand Sam. We, as human beings, you and I, Michael, probably can't understand Sam from Sam's perspective, but we can have a jolly good go of listening, adapting around him, working with him, and trying to ensure that we build Sam up and improve his performance in the best way that we possibly can. So we're giving of Sam based upon what Sam wants and what Sam needs. And we can pick up subtle nuances and verbal cues and body language that will help us to do that. So again, this is another way that emotional intelligence sets us aside from machine technology and robots.
So where do you see things going with emotional intelligence over the next, I don't want to say 5 years, because 5 years ago we didn't anticipate what we'd been through the last 5 years. So I quit asking that question. It's like we certainly didn't call what we, experienced the last 5 years ago. That in 2019, no, we didn't see this coming. But here we are. And, obviously as things go on and all of that, I think emotional intelligence is going to be critical navigating whatever the world throws at us over these next few years. But love to hear your insights on where you think things are going to land and ways individuals and organizations can really hone in on focusing on how EI can really benefit them again as a company and as individuals.
Well, let's have a look at what an organization is, because a lot of people will look at a company, an organization, a corporate entity, and will talk around it and talk about it. But what is an organization? Is it its logo? Is it its equipment? Is it the product that it produces? Is it the factories? Is it the stock? What is it? It's a combination of all of those, but effectively an organization runs because it is run through networks and through people. So what we've got to do is to look at defining what an organization is through the people that engage with the organizations, people who work under the banner of the organization, and all the stakeholders, that's the suppliers, the clients, the people who've got a vested interest in the organization. And we've got to get these networks to work for us as human beings. So emotional intelligence over the last 12, 15, 20 years that I've been working in the field has now become more and more recognized as being a fundamental part of good leadership. I think that's set to continue, and I think what we've got to do is to encourage that, because emotional intelligence is the way forward. I think the other important thing to say is, we can't predict what's going to happen in the next 5 years. I am absolutely certain, 100%, that in our lifetimes, artificial intelligence will not have emotional intelligence. And I can quite honestly and quite categorically say that probably I can quite categorically say that within the next 500 years, machine technology will not have emotional intelligence. And I go back to what I said earlier, that's because machine technology doesn't have the network that you and I have within our heads, which we call a human brain.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. I think it'll be advancing and help us a lot through all kinds of diagnostic tools, healthcare screenings, you name it. It's unlimited what it'll be able to do, but there's going to be a few things that it won't ever be because, as you said earlier, it's the human brain, which is such a unique thing compared to all other creation. Other animals and plants and things like that have brains or something to the equivalent of what a brain does, but the human is such a complex thing, and that's something that no matter how great you are at programming and all of that, it's not going to quite get there. So I've loved this conversation, Robin. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
It's very, very easy. My website is EI for Change. That's EI4change.com. Go along. There's some free resources there. There's a free book on emotional intelligence that you can download. And I'd be delighted to liaise and network and communicate with any of your listeners should anybody want to contact me. And you can contact me at robin@eiforchange.com.
I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So, Robin, thank you for this very important work that you're doing. It's making the world better, especially when people get a better understanding of how they can leverage, their emotions and their intelligence to be a better person, a better leader, and it just benefits us all. So, again, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.